She called the cops on me for parking on my own driveway. 6:47 a.m. Two patrol cars, lights flashing, my muddy F-250 sitting on my concrete pad, fully on my property, and Connie Rettle standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed, wearing that smirk like she'd already won. When the officers stepped out, she pointed at me and said, "I pay your salary. Arrest him." Right there, I knew this wasn't about a truck blocking her view. This was about power, control, the kind of small-town tyranny that crushes good people every single day. But Connie made one mistake, one critical miscalculation. She had no idea I'm a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army. 23 years dismantling threats a lot more dangerous than a suburban HOA dictator. So, what would you have done? Drop your story below. I read every comment. And where are you watching from? Let's see who else is dealing with petty tyrants right now. Let me back up. My name is Vance Hartwick, Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. Army Intelligence, 23 years active duty. I just transitioned to reserve status, 1 weekend a month, keeping my hand in. After 2 decades of living in base housing, moving every 18 months, sleeping in places where mortars were the alarm clock, I finally bought my first real piece of land. 4 acres in Pinewood Estates, Colorado. Trees. Space. Quiet. My wife, Marina, an ICU nurse, tougher than half the soldiers I've commanded, was thrilled. Our son was at West Point. Our daughter studying engineering at CU Boulder. This was supposed to be our chapter, the peaceful one. Every morning, I'd pour black coffee from my stainless percolator, step onto the porch, and just listen. The crunch of frost on gravel under my boots. The smell of pine resin mixing with diesel exhaust from my truck. Cold air that didn't taste like sand or burning oil. It was perfect, for about 8 weeks. Pinewood Estates was 47 homes tucked into the hills outside Colorado Springs. A mix of retirees and young families with a voluntary HOA. No legal binding, just a set of guidelines everyone followed because they wanted the neighborhood to look nice. I figured that meant common sense and mutual respect. Then came Connie Rettle. She'd been HOA president for 11 years. Her house sat right across from mine, big white columns, flagpole with a "Neighborhood Pride" banner flapping under the stars and stripes. She didn't wave when we moved in. She just watched. Clipboard in hand. The type who made sure your garbage can lid was closed before sunrise. At first, I thought she was just particular. But soon, I noticed her pattern, a letter taped to my mailbox because my grass looked too wild. Another because my porch light was too bright. Then the warning about non-approved modifications when I installed motion sensors. I brushed it off. I'd handled men with rifles and grudges, a nosy neighbor wasn't going to rattle me. Until that morning. I'd been up late unloading lumber for a new shed I was building. Parked the truck sideways on the driveway, still fully on my property, just close enough to reach the tools in the back. When the sun came up, I heard her voice outside, sharp and cold. "Violation," she said, snapping a photo with her phone. "Morning to you too," I replied, sipping my coffee. "This is a residential area," she snapped. "Not a construction site." I smiled. "Last I checked, this driveway belongs to me." She stared, eyes narrowing like a sniper sighting in. "We'll see about that." 15 minutes later, 2 squad cars rolled in, blue lights flashing against the pine trees. I just stood there, hands in pockets, watching the whole thing unfold like a bad joke. When the officer stepped out, Connie's smirk widened. "There he is," she said, pointing at me. "He's been warned. This is harassment. Arrest him." The officer looked at me, then at the truck, then back at her. "Ma'am, this is his property." Her lips tightened. "I'm the HOA president. This is a violation of community standards." I took a slow breath, feeling the old discipline rise up like muscle memory. Calm. Controlled. Focused. "Officer," I said quietly, "would you like to see my deed?" That's when Connie's smirk faltered, just a little. She had no idea what kind of fight she'd just started. The officers left after realizing it was a civil matter, not a criminal one. Connie stood there on the sidewalk, fuming as they drove off. Her lips tightened like she was chewing on the idea of losing control. She hated that more than anything. "Don't think this is over, Mr. Hartwick," she said. "Never crossed my mind," I answered, calm as stone. She turned on her heel and stormed off toward her porch, phone already in hand, probably texting her little circle of rule enforcers. I just shook my head and went back to moving lumber, letting the sound of my boots and the thud of boards drown out her drama. By noon, I had an email from the HOA. Subject line, "Formal violation notice." It read like a bad novel: unauthorized obstruction of visibility. Unsafe aesthetic obstruction. Non-compliance with vehicle placement standards. I laughed out loud. My driveway. Unsafe. The only thing unsafe here was how fragile Connie's ego was. That night, Marina came home from her 12-hour shift, still in scrubs, eyes tired but sharp. She took one look at me reading that letter inside. "Another one?" "Yep," I said. "She called the cops this time." Marina froze mid-step. "You're kidding." "Nope. 2 cruisers. Full show." She rubbed her forehead. "Vance, this woman's gonna make our lives hell. Not if I make it a learning experience for her." Marina gave me that look, the one that said she'd seen enough fights in my eyes to know when I'd already decided. "Just, keep it clean," she said softly. The next morning, I started walking the neighborhood. Talking to people. Listening. Turns out, Connie had been running her own little empire for years, sending fines to single moms, threatening retirees, using community standards like a weapon. Most folks just paid up or stayed quiet. But one guy, Tom Alvarez, a retired firefighter with a limp, stopped me halfway down the block. "You the new guy across from Queen Connie?" he asked, half smiling. "That'd be me. She called the cops on me last year for parking my RV in my driveway. My wife was crying over it. I paid the fine just to shut her up. She ever win against someone who pushed back?" I asked. He chuckled. "Nobody's tried." That's when I knew. It wasn't about one driveway. It was about power, and fear. And the thing about fear? You can break it if you stand together. So, I drafted a letter. Not to the HOA, to the neighbors. Simple, direct. Our HOA is supposed to protect our homes, not control them. If you've ever felt bullied, silenced, or fined unfairly, come to my place this Friday night. Let's talk solutions, as neighbors, not subjects. Friday came. I set out folding chairs in the yard, a few lanterns, hot cocoa, and coffee. I wasn't expecting more than a handful. But by 7 o'clock, a dozen people had shown up. Then 20. 30. Even a few kids playing on the grass while their parents stood around talking. Tom brought donuts. A young mom, Erica, brought cookies. An older couple, the Millers, shared a folder full of old HOA letters they'd saved, all signed by Connie. It wasn't an angry crowd. It was tired. Defeated. Ready for something different. I stood up, hands in my jacket pockets. "Look," I said, "I spent 23 years in the army. I've seen power used for good, and for control. And I'll tell you this, control only wins when people give up. You all deserve fairness, not fear. If we stand together, we can change this." Someone clapped. Then another. And soon the whole yard filled with the sound of tired people rediscovering hope. That's when I noticed movement across the street, Connie, standing at her window, phone in hand, filming us. She looked furious. But for the first time, maybe a little scared. The following Monday morning, my phone buzzed before sunrise. A message from an unknown number. Unauthorized gathering. Violation of HOA community order. You'll regret this. No signature, but I didn't need one. Connie's brand of threat had a tone, polished, passive-aggressive, soaked in self-importance. I smiled, set the phone down, and poured myself another cup of coffee. By mid-morning, envelopes started appearing in mailboxes around the neighborhood, thick ones stamped "Urgent HOA Notice." Inside, a letter from Connie announcing an emergency board meeting to discuss unlawful assembly and neighborhood disruptions caused by Mr. Hartwick. It was official, she'd declared war. That evening, Marina came home just as I was ironing a clean shirt. She looked at me, eyebrows raised. "You really going to that meeting? Wouldn't miss it." She exhaled through her nose. "You know she's baiting you." "Good," I said. "I'm done playing defense." The HOA clubhouse sat at the end of the cul-de-sac, a beige building that smelled faintly of coffee, dust, and over-polished wood. By the time I arrived, half the neighborhood was already there. Connie stood at the front, framed by an American flag and a banner that read, "Pinewood Pride, Standards Matter." Her lips were tight, smile thinner than paper. "Mr. Hartwick," she said sweetly as I entered. "Nice of you to join us. I trust you've read the agenda." "I read it," I said, taking a seat near the front. "Didn't see anything about truth or decency, though. Maybe that's under miscellaneous." A few chuckles rippled through the room. Connie's eyes flicked toward them like a whip. She cleared her throat. "Residents, this meeting concerns an escalating disruption caused by one homeowner who refuses to respect community guidelines." "Excuse me," I interrupted, calm but steady. "You mean one homeowner who invited his neighbors to talk openly? That's called democracy, Connie." A few heads nodded. She shot them a glare. "The HOA is not a democracy, Mr. Hartwick. It's an organization built on order." "Then maybe that's the problem," I said. Silence. Thick. You could almost hear her jaw tighten. She tried to move on. "We've received multiple complaints about gatherings, unapproved structures, and aggressive behavior toward HOA officials." I stood up slowly. "If by unapproved structure you mean the shed on my property," I submitted photos. "If by gatherings you mean coffee and conversation, I'm guilty as charged. And as for aggressive behavior, I'd call it standing my ground." Tom Alvarez raised his hand. "I was at that gathering. Nobody broke rules. We were just talking." "Connie, you fined half this neighborhood for nonsense. Enough's enough." Murmurs filled the room. One by one, people started speaking. A young mom said she was fined for her kid's basketball hoop. A veteran said his flagpole was too tall. A widow said she paid $300 because her mailbox was the wrong shade of beige. It all poured out, years of fear, frustration, and quiet anger. Connie tried to shout them down. "These are baseless accusations. I enforce fairness." I stepped closer to the front, my voice low but strong. "Fairness isn't something you enforce, Connie. It's something you live by." She slammed her hand on the podium. "You're undermining me." I looked around at the crowd, my neighbors, their faces finally alive with something that looked like courage. "No," I said. "We're reclaiming our community." A wave of applause filled the room. People stood. Connie's face went pale. She tried to regain control, banging the gavel, yelling about rules and bylaws. But nobody was listening anymore. I leaned in just enough for only her to hear. "You picked the wrong soldier to bully." Then I walked out. Outside, the night air was cold, but it felt clean. Tom followed me out, clapping me on the back. "You might have just started a revolution, Colonel. I smiled. Nah. Just a reminder that respect isn't something you vote on. And for the first time since we'd moved there, Pinewood Estates felt like a community again. The next few days were quiet, too quiet. No more letters. No more surprise inspections. Connie's front porch light stayed off, and the usual stream of HOA emails dried up. But I knew her silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. On Thursday morning, I got the proof. A thick envelope from the Pinewood Legal Committee. Inside, a cease and desist order claiming I was disrupting neighborhood harmony and causing emotional distress to the HOA president. Attached was a bill, $1,200 in administrative fines. Marina found me standing at the kitchen counter, staring at it. "You've got to be kidding," she said. "Nope," I muttered. "This is her last shot. So what are you gonna do?" I looked out the window at the frost clinging to the pine branches. Fight it the right way. That afternoon, I started gathering evidence, screenshots of her texts, copies of old HOA fines neighbors shared, even recordings from the meeting. I filed everything neatly, labeled by date and incident. Old habits from the service, document, verify, act. By evening, I had a binder thick enough to stop a bullet. Then I emailed everyone who came to the gathering. Friday, 6 p.m. at my place again. "We're filing for leadership change. Enough is enough." When Friday came, even more people showed up, 40 this time, bundled in jackets, coffee cups steaming in the cold. The air buzzed with something powerful, unity. I stood on my porch and said, "We can complain forever or take action. I've spoken to a lawyer. Connie's been using HOA funds for her own benefit, and we have proof." Gasps. Murmurs. Then silence. Marina held up a folder. Receipts. Hardware store purchases for her house, not the community. Thousands. The mood shifted from frustration to fire. Tom Alvarez stepped forward. "So how do we remove her?" I nodded. "The bylaws say we can call a vote if 2/3 of homeowners sign a petition. I've got the forms right here." People lined up. Pen after pen scratched across the pages. It didn't take an hour before we had enough signatures. The next day, we delivered it to Connie's mailbox, hand-delivered, witnessed, and filmed. She came out as we were leaving, her hair tied back, eyes sharp like glass. "What do you think you're doing?" she hissed. "Following the rules," I said, meeting her gaze. "You should try it sometime." For a second, I saw something flicker behind her eyes, fear. Real, unfiltered fear. By Monday, word spread like wildfire. Even residents who used to side with Connie were now distancing themselves. She tried to send out a clarification letter, blaming everything on misunderstandings, but it was too late. The vote was scheduled for Friday at the same clubhouse where she'd once ruled the microphone. When I arrived, the parking lot was full. People stood shoulder to shoulder inside, retirees, young couples, families with kids. Connie sat at the front, pale, clutching her clipboard like a life raft. "Let's begin," she said, voice trembling just slightly. Tom stood and read the petition aloud. Every signature, every claim backed with proof. Photos. Receipts. Emails. The room was dead silent except for the shuffle of paper and the faint hum of the heater. Then it was time for the vote. Those in favor of removing Connie Reddle as HOA president. Hands went up. Dozens of them. Then nearly everyone. The room held its breath as the count finished. 38 out of 47. It was over. Connie lowered her gaze. For once, there was no speech, no gavel, no power. Just silence. As we walked out into the cold Colorado night, Tom turned to me and said, "Feels like freedom, huh?" I looked at the glowing windows of the homes lining the street, warm, alive, peaceful. Yeah, I said quietly. The kind that comes after a long war. Snow had started falling by the time the final vote was certified. Fat flakes drifting down through the porch light glow, settling on mailboxes and roofs like a clean slate. It felt symbolic, the whole neighborhood starting fresh. For the first time in months, the street was quiet. Not tense quiet. Peaceful quiet. Kids played in driveways again. The older couples waved when they passed. Even the mailman smiled. Pinewood Estates finally felt like the kind of place we dreamed of moving to. Connie stayed inside for a while. No one saw her much. A few neighbors said she'd listed her house for sale, others said she was taking time off. Either way, the town's self-appointed queen had stepped off her throne. One Sunday morning, as I was clearing snow off the truck, I heard footsteps crunching on the ice. When I turned, Connie was standing at the edge of my driveway, coat zipped up to her chin, hands trembling slightly, eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. "Mr. Hartwick," she said quietly. "Vance." I didn't answer right away. Just leaned on my shovel, waiting. "I wanted to apologize," she said. Her voice cracked a little. I let the power get to my head. It started out as pride, keeping the neighborhood nice. Then it became something else. I nodded slowly. "You hurt a lot of good people, Connie. But it takes something to stand here and admit that." She sighed, breath turning to mist in the cold air. "I suppose I forgot what community really means." I gave her a small smile. "It means people before rules. Always has." She nodded, eyes glistening. Then she turned and walked away, no speech, no clipboard, no smirk. Just a person trying to find peace. That evening, we held one last neighborhood gathering, not a protest this time, just a celebration. Kids roasted marshmallows by a small fire pit, the Millers played old country songs on a speaker, and for once, nobody talked about violations or bylaws. Tom raised his mug and shouted, "To Pinewood Estates, the Free Republic." Everyone laughed and cheered. I looked around at the faces glowing in the firelight, the same people who once lived under quiet fear. Now they stood shoulder to shoulder, talking, laughing, alive. And for the first time, I felt the weight of something deeper than victory. It wasn't about beating Connie. It was about proving that ordinary people could stand up for fairness without losing their decency. Later that night, as the fire burned low and the crowd thinned, Marina came to stand beside me. "So, Colonel," she said softly, "what's next?" I looked at the stars over the pines and smiled. "Maybe just living. That's enough." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "You think people will remember this?" "Maybe not the details," I said. "But they'll remember what it felt like to stand together." The wind carried the faint sound of laughter through the trees, and I thought about all the places I'd been, all the chaos, the orders, the battles. Funny how the hardest fight of my life ended up being for a driveway. And maybe that was the point. Sometimes freedom doesn't need a battlefield, just neighbors brave enough to say enough. Title card: Fairness only wins when good people stop staying silent. Call to action. If you've ever dealt with someone abusing power, in your neighborhood, your job, or anywhere else, remember this: respect isn't something they give you. It's something you claim, together. Drop your story below. Let's hear how you stood your ground. The end.